I stood frozen in my doorway, keys still dangling from my trembling hand, staring at the last person I ever expected to see in my living room. Margaret Chen sat perched on the edge of my worn leather couch, her usually perfect posture slightly hunched, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles had gone white. When she looked up at me, I saw something in her eyes I'd never witnessed in the 3 years I'd dated her son: vulnerability. "Please don't be angry," she whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't know where else to go. This was the woman who had served me tea in bone china cups while subtly suggesting I wasn't ambitious enough for her son. The woman who had smiled politely at family dinners while making it clear I'd never quite measure up to her expectations. The woman who, when Daniel broke up with me 6 months ago, hadn't even bothered to say goodbye. And now here she was, in my apartment, looking utterly broken. I should have asked her to leave. Every rational part of my brain screamed at me to protect myself, to maintain the boundaries I'd worked so hard to establish after the breakup. But something in her expression stopped me. I'd seen that look before, in my own mirror, during those first awful weeks after Daniel ended things. What happened? I heard myself asking, stepping inside and closing the door behind me. Margaret's composure crumbled. Tears streamed down her face as she struggled to speak. Daniel told me, he told me to never contact him again. We had a fight about his engagement, and he said terrible things. He said I was controlling, that I'd ruined his life with my expectations, that his fiancée's mother was more of a parent to him than I'd ever been. She pressed her hand to her mouth, stifling a sob. I tried calling, but he blocked my number. I went to his apartment, and he wouldn't open the door. I stood there, processing this information. Daniel was engaged. Of course he was. He'd always moved quickly, always had a plan, always checked boxes on his timeline. It shouldn't have hurt anymore, but it did, just a little. But looking at Margaret, I realized something startling. My hurt was nothing compared to hers. "I know I have no right to be here," she continued, wiping her eyes with a tissue she'd clutched into a ball. "I know I wasn't kind to you. I know I made you feel small, and I'm so sorry, Sophia. But I saw your light on as I was driving around, and I couldn't be alone. And I thought maybe you, of all people, might understand what it feels like to be cut off by him." The old me would have felt vindicated. The old me might have even felt a twisted satisfaction seeing the woman who deemed me unworthy now sitting here in pieces. But I'd spent 6 months in therapy learning that hurt people, and that healing meant choosing compassion over bitterness. I sat down beside her on the couch. "Let me make us some tea." As the kettle heated, I listened to Margaret talk. Really talk. Not the polite, surface-level conversation we'd endured at countless dinners, but honest, raw confession. She told me about raising Daniel alone after her husband died when Daniel was 8. About working 2 jobs to put him through private school. About pouring every ounce of her energy into ensuring he had opportunities she'd never had. "I thought I was giving him everything," she said, accepting the mug of chamomile I handed her. "But somehow I gave him so much ambition that he forgot how to be content. So many expectations that he can't forgive anyone for being human. Including himself. Including me." I thought about the Daniel I'd known, brilliant, driven, but always restless. Always looking at what was next rather than appreciating what was present. I'd loved him desperately, but I'd also exhausted myself trying to be enough for someone who didn't know how to be satisfied. "You know what the fight was about?" Margaret asked, her voice hollow. I asked if his fiancée made him happy. That's all. Just a simple question. And he exploded. Said I always implied nothing was good enough, that I'd questioned every choice he'd ever made. Maybe he's right. Maybe I did focus so much on achievement that I forgot to tell him he was already enough, just as he was. The honesty stunned me. This was not the proud, composed woman I'd known. This was someone genuinely trying to understand where things had gone wrong. We talked for hours that night. I told her about my own relationship with Daniel, about feeling like I was constantly being measured and found wanting. She apologized, genuinely apologized, for her part in that. She explained that she'd seen my kindness as weakness, my contentment as lack of ambition, when really she'd been projecting her own fears onto me. "You were good for him," she admitted. "You made him laugh. I saw him relax around you in ways he never did with anyone else. But I was so afraid that if he settled for comfortable, he'd wake up one day and resent it. Resent you. I thought I was protecting him, but I was really just passing on my own regrets. As dawn broke through my windows, Margaret looked at me with something like wonder. Why are you being so kind to me? After everything. I thought about that question. Because holding on to anger was poisoning me more than it was hurting anyone else. And because I think we both loved the same person and wanted the best for him, even if we had different ideas about what that meant. And maybe because seeing you hurting reminded me that we're all just doing our best, even when our best falls short. Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. You're remarkable, you know that. Daniel was a fool to let you go. I smiled sadly. We weren't right for each other. But that doesn't mean we can't be kind about it. Over the following weeks, something unexpected happened. Margaret and I began meeting for coffee. She talked about her attempts to repair her relationship with Daniel, the therapy she'd started, the hard work of examining her own behavior. I talked about my life, my work, the new hobbies I'd taken up since the breakup. Slowly, we built something that resembled friendship. One afternoon, 3 months after that first night, Margaret called me. Daniel wants to meet, she said, her voice trembling with hope. He's been in therapy too. He's not ready to forgive everything, but he's willing to talk. And Sophia, he asked about you. He said letting you go was one of his biggest mistakes, and that he hopes you're happy. I was happy. Not because of Daniel or despite him, but because I'd chosen to heal rather than harden. Because I'd extended kindness to someone who hadn't earned it and discovered that the gift was as much for me as for her. I'm glad you're talking again, I told her honestly. You both deserve that chance. I told him about our friendship, Margaret said. About how you helped me when you had every reason to turn me away. He cried, Sophia. He said you taught him something through your absence that he never learned in our presence, that real strength is choosing compassion when you have every right to choose bitterness. When we hung up, I looked around my small apartment, the same couch where I'd found Margaret that night, the same worn rug, the same peaceful space I'd built for myself. It wasn't grand or impressive by anyone's standards but my own, but it was filled with light. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is extend grace to those who hurt us. Not because they deserve it, but because we deserve the freedom that comes from letting go. That night, when I opened my door to Margaret, I thought I was just being decent. I didn't realize I was actually setting both of us free.